You're on.
Good evening from Willowdale. This is Late Night from Willowdale. Hey, we are actually at night in Willowdale at Goulding Park. So we're going to really make a contained video, 5 minutes to 10 minutes. So we're going to talk about a couple of issues. So the first issue is the United Arab Emirates Israel peace deal, the agreement that the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, and Israel will establish diplomatic ties, formal ties. You've all seen the headlines. So just always like to show the headlines. So, an historic peace agreement establishing formal ties, a landmark agreement. It's a big deal. This is going to realign. This is a major realignment in the Middle East, and it's only the United Arab Emirates is only the third country to establish the third Arab country to establish relations with Israel. Obviously, Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994. And I remember being in Israel in the spring of 1979 when Jimmy Carter was there trying to restart the peace process. That was really interesting, being in Israel during an historic time, March of 1979. And Jimmy Carter, I remember when we flew into Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, we pulled up right beside Air Force One. It was pretty cool. So anyways, this is going to realign everything in the Middle East. There's a number of things to talk about here. The first and the most important, I guess, issue is that this is the beginning of the end of the dream of a Palestinian state. It's over. I mean, it was over a long time ago, but this is the nail. This is the final nail in the coffin, because other Arab countries will follow, and Bahrain and Oman will probably follow the UAE in establishing relations with Israel, and then eventually, probably within the next couple of years, Saudi Arabia, which is the linchpin, right? Because of conservative elements in Saudi Arabia, that's going to still be a while off, but it'll probably happen. All the Gulf states, the UAE, Oman, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, they've all been having covert relations with Israel for years, going back 20, 30 years. So the UAE is, United Arab Emirates, is coming out of the closet. They see a real value in having relations with Israel. Israel has a dynamic economy. It's a high-tech country. They have access to military and security equipment that they could not get, and now having a peace deal with Israel, they'll have access to American equipment that they couldn't get if they hadn't had the deal with Israel. So for the United Arab Emirates, it's a big deal, and for Israel, it's obviously a big deal, and it's a major realignment of what's going on in the Middle East. Israel's coming out of the cold in a way, and eventually Morocco will establish full ties. So the losers here are the Palestinians. And the Palestinians weren't going to get their state anyways. That's gone. The facts on the ground, the continued settlement activity, the annexation of Palestinian land has been going on for years. And it was almost irreversible. The Palestinians, you really can't have a contiguous Palestinian state. Palestine, now the West Bank, it's got all these, it's bifurcated by all these settlements and security checkpoints, and there's no contiguous state. It's basically a bunch of little Bantustans, and the dream of a Palestinian state was over a long time ago with this continued expansion into the West Bank, all these Israeli settlements. If you look at a map, it's just, what I'm saying is the Palestinian state is the dream of Palestinian state is gone. And all I can say to the Palestinians, you just have to, it's not going to happen anytime soon. There's a lot of resistance, obviously, in Israel, and there's resistance in Palestine. You're not, but you have to. The only thing you're going to get is a struggle. It's the struggle for political and civil rights within a greater Israel, or what I always like to say, Israel and Palestine. And it's going to happen anytime soon. But a lot of Israelis are opposed to that. A lot of Palestinians are opposed to that. But yeah, I see the only solution here is Palestinians becoming full Israeli citizens in a binational state, if you were. I've never liked the idea of religious or ethnic-based states, so I'm all for a binational state. Call it Israel and Palestine. Anyways, that isn't going to happen anytime soon, and there's a lot of resistance to that. But a lot of people are talking about a one-state solution, so at least they're starting to talk about it. But yeah, Palestinian state is finished. The Arab world has moved on. They don't care anymore. And look, Trump moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Nobody cared in the Arab world. Trump allowed the annexation of the Golan Heights, or recognized Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights in northern Israel along the Syrian border. Nobody cared. And in the Arab world, there was some condemnation, but the big powers in the Arab world, in fact, a lot of them thought it was great. Egypt thought it was great. Jordan thought it was good. And of course, Bahrain and Oman are going to probably follow the UAE and recognize Israel, and then eventually Saudi Arabia. And the Palestinians aren't an issue anymore. What have I said before, Cleve? The dogs bark, the drums roll, and the caravan moves on.
What was that for? I forget.
Yeah, we were talking about people jumping on issues like
Right.
the BLM stuff.
Right.
But yeah, that's right. The people have moved on. The Arab world has moved on. There are a lot of people in the Arab world that are fearful of Iran, and which I think is silly, frankly. I always thought this threat of Iran is overplayed, and this hatred of Iran is irrational, and I believe in rapprochement with Iran. But Iran is a problem, and so, but yeah, a lot of these Gulf states, they see Israel as the big regional power now, militarily strong, a country that could take on Iran, a country that has all sorts of investment possibilities, strong technology sector, strong economy. Yeah, so I mean, Israel is one of the few countries in the Middle East that's not a failed state. Most of these countries are failed states. Look at Israel's northern neighbor, Lebanon. Talk about a failed state. And there's all sorts of reasons for this. Lebanon is
Multiple civil wars, or
yeah, going back, they got their independence from France in 1943, and and of course Lebanon has all these, warring sects, different sectarian groups, different religious groups. They have to, the Druze, the Muslims, the Christians all have to share power, and then of course there's Hezbollah. It's a mess. It's totally corrupt. It totally doesn't work. It's a failed state if there ever was one, and it didn't have to be that way. I mean, Beirut was called the Paris of the Middle East. They endured a 15-year horrible civil war that ended from 75 to 1990. Look, Israel was up to no good in Lebanon either. There was the war in 2006. Israel has constantly intervened in Lebanese affairs, so the Syrians invaded. I mean, yeah, it's poor. They say pity poor Lebanon. It's true. Yeah, this brings me to the talk about failed states, and the Middle East has lots of them. Israel is definitely not one of them. The problem with Israel now is they face the problem of a Palestinian Bantustan, a restive population, and the Palestinians aren't going anywhere, and the Israelis don't make it easy for the Palestinians either. If they're not going to get I remember what Hillary Clinton said a number of years ago. She's told Netanyahu, she said to him, if you're not going to give them a state, at least make their lives easier. Get rid of all these checkpoints and these onerous sort of security things that the Palestinians have to go through. Make their lives easier. And I still think the Israelis could do that. And the Emiratis should pressure them and say, make the lives of Palestinians easier so they don't have to go through all these bloody checkpoints. And the stupid wall that Israel built, I was just reading in the New York Times the other day that Palestinians were given some access to the Mediterranean. A lot of Palestinians have never seen the Mediterranean and never been to the sea, and it's only 30, 40 miles away. Yeah, give them access to the Mediterranean. Let them go into Israel. Make their lives easier. Maybe eventually something could happen. Like I said, I don't see a Palestinian state. I think it's over. I think the dream of that's done. But anything could happen. But right now, the Israelis should try to make the lives of Palestinians easier, reducing checkpoints, reducing the security that they have, letting Palestinians travel around the West Bank, which they can't do now. It's onerous. You can't go from one area of the West Bank to that. You can't go. It's hard to go from Ramallah to Jericho to Nablus. I mean, it's terrible. So make the lives of the Palestinians easier. If these Arab states, the Gulf states, are going to establish relations with Israel like the UAE is doing, they should pressure Israelis to do Israel to do that. The other thing is the Emiratis knew that the Emiratis also did this as a favor to Trump. They wanted to give Trump a victory. Let's face it, the Gulf states are very pro-Trump, and they would prefer to have Trump in power than Biden. Because Trump doesn't care about human rights or that. So Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, will do anything to keep Trump in power. So by the Emirates signing this peace deal with Israel, it gives Trump a victory. They would like to see Trump remain in power. So now the Emirates is also, the Financial Times calls them the Sparta of the Gulf. They're a powerful country militarily. They've been involved in Yemen. They were a strong fighting force in Yemen. They pulled out of Yemen. They were basically doing the Saudis' bidding, and I think they got tired of it. They're strong financially. They have lots of oil. Abu Dhabi and Dubai are huge financial centers. Emirates is one of the biggest airlines in the world, if not the biggest. They're a strong power, a regional power. And so now they're allied with another strong regional power, Israel. And so now there's this whole coalition of countries confronting Iran. And Iran really has no allies. And Iran is falling apart. And Iran is becoming a failed state. And don't get me wrong, the U.S. has helped that with the sanctions, which are ridiculous, which are horrible. Iran could be a really successful country. It's got a strong, educated young people. It's got lots of resources. It has so much to offer, and yet, despite the sanctions, Iran could still be a relatively strong country. But they do stupid things. They imprison people for no reason. It's a repressive country. They've mishandled the COVID thing. The religious hierarchy is totally screwing things up. Of course, they have the Revolutionary Guard, which are a bunch of thugs. So Iran is not doing itself any favors, and they don't deserve these sanctions that the U.S. have put on them, but they're not doing themselves any favors either. They should be, they should be. I mean, if Iran should be, the future of Iran is yet to be determined, but it is falling apart, and they're suppressing democratic. They're suppressing demonstrations. They're killing demonstrators. But eventually this is going to end. There's a lot of pressure internally. After the COVID disaster in Iran, as you know, thousands of people died in Iran because of COVID. There's a lot of pressure on the religious hierarchy. And we'll see where it goes. I don't see the mullahs or the ayatollahs falling anytime soon. But it's going to happen. You see what's happening in Belarus. Long-time dictators are eventually deposed. So we'll see what happens. I'm not going to talk about Belarus, but Iran is, I think, it could be going that way, and we don't know what's going to happen in Belarus. Now, let's talk about the other major regional power that is interfering in other countries' affairs, and that's Turkey. Turkey, Erdogan, I think, wants to, and we've talked about this before, Erdogan wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. Okay? He feels that the breakup of the Soviet Union was an insult to many Russians and to Putin. Erdogan thinks that the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, God, the end of the Second World War, 1918, whatever, that was a real embarrassment for Turkey. So he sees himself as trying to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. So Turkey's intervening in Libya, backing basically a United Nations sponsored government. The Emirates are backing the other side along with Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Turkey has intervened in Syria, as we know. And Turkey has made incursions into Iraq. So Turkey is trying to establish itself as a major player in the Middle East. Turkey was not happy at all with this UAE-Israel agreement. Turkey aligns itself with Iran on a lot of things, but Turkey is and Turkey, of course, is meddling in the Eastern Mediterranean, where there's lots of natural gas, and Turkey feels left out because Israel, Greece, Egypt, the Greek Cypriots, they all have interest in the natural gas in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey feels left out, so they're beginning to meddle in that, and there's even been some confrontations between French and Turkish warships, which is kind of weird because they're both NATO allies, although Turkey seems to be on the outside of NATO. So there's lots of interesting things going on in this region of the world, and it's interesting to see the Emirates and Turkey as two major powers using their muscle to influence things in the region. So it's like the Great Game being played out in North Africa and in the Gulf region, and we'll see where it all plays out. Libya is an example of Libya's a failed state because we made it so. Under Gaddafi was, Gaddafi basically ran the place. It wasn't great, but we intervened in Libya, and we turned Libya into a failed state, and now it's a disgrace. Again, a country with lots of resources, and you have two factions in Libya, one backed by the UN and Turkey, and another backed by the Egypt, the Emirates, and France even. It backs that side as well, and they're all fighting. Turkey seems to have the upper hand. So we'll see what happens in Libya. So I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm saying there's lots of interesting dynamics going on. Okay, so this brings me to sort of the end of this video, and this is kind of a rambling video, but failed states. Lebanon is a failed state. Libya is a failed state. Iraq is, actually things are improving in Iraq. So there is hope. Iran is going to be a failed state. Syria obviously is beyond a failed state. It's just totally broken up. So what to do about these failed states? How do you deal with it? It was interesting to see Macron in Beirut, the French president in Beirut last week, and a lot of Lebanese would like to see the French. Lebanon was a French colony. A lot of people in Beirut, in Lebanon, would like to see the French take over the Lebanese government and establish some stability. Sometimes you kind of wonder, like they always say, it's true, a lot of these failed states were former colonies of the Brits, the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese, particularly in Africa. And once they got independence, nothing ever worked. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's colonialism, that they're never able to overcome that. But all the the reason a lot of these countries are failed states is because the local elites basically made off with the money and became dictatorships and stole all the money. Look at Mobutu in the Congo. Oh my God, that's one of the great examples. But you can't always blame colonialism, European colonialism, for why these countries in Africa and Middle East are failed states. I mean, it's a bit simplistic. So what to do about failed states? You and I were talking about that earlier. That's a tough one. Because failed states are unstable, and Lebanon is a classic example, and they lead to more instability, and there should be some mechanism to help reconstruct these countries. I don't know what the answer is, but the world has so many. Afghanistan's a failed state. Pakistan's always on the border of being a failed state.
Didn't Trudeau try something earlier? He was going on about Canada's role in the world, and he was hoping that the Security Council seat would help people bring this neoliberal agenda to failed states or whatever. Yeah.
I don't know. Well, that Security Council thing was a waste of time, in my opinion. I think if Trudeau really wanted to contribute to the world, they should basically talk to Macron and say, how do we deal with failed states? How do we make states functional again? In Africa, in the Middle East. It's an interesting topic about because they do create a lot of instability. Problems of Lebanon, I don't have any easy solutions for that. Maybe the French should take over Lebanon again. And talking about the Ottoman Empire, Turkey wants to basically reestablish the Ottoman Empire. Maybe there's some good in that, stabilizing Syria, maybe stabilizing Libya. Turkey's involved in Somalia. So there's another failed state.
Mohammed needs to come back.
Yeah. I don't know what to, I'm sort of rambling here because there's no easy answers to some of this, but there's a lot of dynamics going on in the Middle East now that are fascinating, and I don't think that the Emirates-Israel deal is a bad thing. I think it brings some stability to the region, and like I said, some other Gulf countries will follow, and eventually Saudi Arabia. And yes, the Palestinians are left out in the cold, but the Palestinians just kind of screwed things up. Maybe they should have accepted the deal that Clinton had worked out with Yasser Arafat, or Yasser Arafat rejected it, but they had a deal in 2000 that would have given them something, and the Palestinians rejected it. It was they're never, and now they got nothing. Okay, now they got nothing, and the Palestinian Authority is totally corrupt. And I worked in the Palestinian cause for 15 years, and I met a lot of Palestinian elites that came through Toronto, and a lot of them were really not very pleasant, full of themselves. They stayed in the best hotels. They always had to fly business class, and it's like they just loved being part of the Arab elite, and they didn't really care about the people of Palestine, and that's very typical, right? So my sympathies sometimes, when I see Hanan Ashrawi, she's a classic on TV, and she's been around for many years and going on and on about violation of international law and this and that. She doesn't care. She lives the high life, travels around the world in private jets, and oh God, these people, yeah. And I say that, I thought, well, it is, of course, Israel's totally violated international law, but nobody cares. So, you know what? Get over it. It's like there is no international law. There's American law, basically, and as long as there's a law of power, and Israel has a lot of power, and it's backed by the most powerful country in the world, and the European Union is basically, when it comes to foreign affairs, it's pretty weak. So Israel can pretty much do what it wants. And now the Arab states have basically said, yep, we're going to align with Israel. We don't care about the Palestinians. We've moved on, The dogs bark, the drums roll, and the caravan moves on. And that's what's happened in the Middle East. The Palestinians are an afterthought now. Now, I think these Arab states, and this is all in, because this has been kind of a rambly video. which I didn't want it to be, but there's so much going on and I don't have any solutions for any of it. The Arab states should be pressuring Israel to make the lives of Palestinians easier, okay? If they can't get rid of some of these stupid checkpoints, make it so people can drive from one end of the West Bank to the other, and get rid of that stupid wall that Israel has built. So Palestinians should be able to drive into the state of Israel and drive to the Mediterranean. Make their lives easier. If you're not going to give them the state, at least make their lives easier, and maybe at some point something can be worked out. But yeah, the UAE-Israel deal is realigning forces in the Middle East. Other countries in the Gulf will establish ties with Israel as well. The Emirates have become a major player. Turkey is trying to reestablish itself as a major player in the region. All these dynamics are going on, what I call the little great game. So we'll see how it all plays out, and then what to do about failed states. Lebanon, Libya, countries in Central Africa, Syria, obviously, Afghanistan, Iran. I think if things don't change, will become a failed state. But I think things are going to change in Iran. There's a lot of internal strife, and what you're seeing in Belarus, you'll see more of that in Iran. And this has already been going on, but yeah, things will change. The Middle East is in a really interesting transition. Put North Africa and the Middle East are in a really interesting transition point now. Algeria is sort of stabilizing. Tunisia has always been pretty stable. Morocco is pretty stable. Egypt is a basket case, but it's stable. It's only stable because it's a repressive dictatorship, and of course Erdogan, Turkey is becoming more and more repressive, which is not good. But I'm kind of happy that Erdogan is backing the UN-sponsored government in Libya. I think that's a good thing, actually. And if I actually, some people would be angry if I said that, but I wouldn't mind Turkey taking over Syria, reestablishing a bit of the Ottoman Empire, and maybe taking over Lebanon too. Establishing some stability in Lebanon. Not that Turkey or Erdogan are perfect by any means; they're not. But yeah, maybe a reestablishment of part of the Ottoman Empire isn't a bad thing. Some people think I'm crazy for saying that, but yeah. So lots of changes. Yeah, and I think it's pity poor Lebanon, eh? So, well, hopefully there'll be some positive changes there, but I don't see anything in the.
Didn't the whole cabinet resign or something?
Yeah, but until you get rid of the power structures in Lebanon and all these sectarian cliques and religious parties that control things. And then there's the deep-seated corruption, and oh my God, it's a mess. You almost need someone to come in and just take it all over. And I don't know what to do, but failed states like Lebanon. It should be some responsibility of the international community, the UN. If Trudeau wants to do something positive, other than giving money, other than giving money to corrupt charities, maybe he should work on that. Anyways, all right, that's it. It rambled on a bit. Sorry, it was a bit rambly, but I just wanted. Yeah, I think
you covered all your points.
I think I've covered all the points. Is there anything you think we missed?
I think you did. Did you mention that Israel? Probably one of the reasons Israel is kind of making headway in the Middle East now is because they're a democratic. Yeah, I think
Israel Israel is a democratic country, and it is occupying another. It is occupying another, state or people or state. It's an occupying power, which is not good. It is anyway. It's as it stands now. Israel. No one likes to say it, but it is an apartheid country because it is occupying and having control over another people, and they don't have full rights. So, but for Israelis, it is a democratic country. Gay people have full rights. I mean, it's the only country in the Middle East where gay people have full rights. It's economically successful. Totally. It's a totally success story. And if they if they could treat the Palestinians with a bit of, with a bit of respect and dignity, it would be a better place. And I don't see why they don't get that. And they would have more sympathy around the world if they did that. If they're not going to give them a state, as I said, just give them more freedom and let them, give them more freedom and let them travel around the West Bank without having all these restrictions. And we've been through that. So, and I do think that there should be one country, Israel and Palestine, and give it Palestinians full give Palestinians full civil rights, full, political rights, civil rights. Anyways, we'll see what happens. If all I'm saying is, if the Arab country's going to make peace with Israel, and it looks like they're doing that, they need to pressure Israel on these things. But there are all these dynamics going on. It's a fascinating. It's depressing, but also fascinating. And as I said before, the Middle East in many ways is a basket case. Other than Israel and the Emirates and the Gulf states, they're all basket cases. The Middle East accounts for a very small percentage of world trade and parts of the world economy. So it needs help. But this UAE's real deal is a big deal. It's a game changer, and it shows you a major realignment of what's happening. And the country that is going to be very isolated will be Iran, and even more so than they are. And it's interesting what Turkey's doing. And and I've repeated myself many times, and I apologize. But keep watching developments in this region. They are interesting, and we're seeing the great game being played out between Turkey, the Gulf states, Israel, and we'll see where it all goes. And I'm sorry to ramble on. I said 10 minutes, and I've gone a little further. But we haven't even talked about American politics. Talk about a failed state. Well, in many ways, the U.S. is a failed state. That's a bit of hyperbole, but if you look at the COVID crisis, if you look at the fact that they're not even sure they're going to have a fair election in November, and as we know from past elections, they've been screwed up and stuff. In many ways, the U.S. is a failed state.
But hasn't voting in the United States generally been, even historically, just very uncorrupted and kind of, because they were having this big issue about mail-in voting and all this stuff.
No, it generally works out in the end.
Yeah.
But why does it take so long to tabulate the votes and get the votes out? In Canada, provincial, municipal, federal elections, within an hour of the polls closing, who's been elected. Why does it take the U.S. so long to do this? You're right. No, it's generally not. It's not corrupt. It just they screw it up. It takes a long time. There's always seems to be problems. Of course, there's voter suppression, and it always amazes me. Anyways, we could go on about the. It's interesting. I don't even want to talk about Biden, Kamala Harris, Kamala Harris, right? Let's pronounce that properly. It's